Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about the endless lies and propaganda from the press about forest fires. The press is full of hysterical stories like this: record wildfires on the West Coast, 5 of the 6 largest California wildfires in history. What role does climate change play in forest fires? The most fires recorded in a year was 2020 with 17,425. So according to the World Economic Forum, the most fires in one year was 17,425. Let's check now to see if that's true. Here's an article from the New York Times dated October 9, 1938. Forest fires, one every 3 minutes in 1937, burned almost 22 million acres of land. And then in the article they say that there was 185,209 forest fires last year, which was more than 10 times as many fires as the World Economic Forum claimed was the record. It's unfortunate that New York Times writers don't actually read their own newspaper. And according to California Governor Newsom, more than 90% of the fires were started by humans.
New active fires that have come up over the course of the weekend, the El Dorado, getting a lot of attention because it's a reminder that the vast majority of fires that we experience on an annual basis come from individuals making bad decisions or by simple neglect and accident, meaning 90 plus percent of the fires that we experience in the state of California on an annual basis are man-made fires.
Perhaps the World Economic Forum could explain how climate change causes people to start fires. Now let's look at the real history of U.S. forest fires. This graph was published by the U.S. Forest Service, who I used to work for as a wilderness ranger. This graph shows burn acreage in the United States from 1916 through 2008. You can see that there was a huge peak during the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. Burn acreage this year has been about 8 million acres, so it would plot over here. Burn acreage this year is nowhere near a record. It's down more than 80% since 1930. So we might ask, what caused this huge spike in fires from the 1920s through the 1940s? These graphs of heat waves from the National Climate Assessment make it pretty clear what caused those fires. Heat waves in the U.S. were much worse prior to the year 1960. And heat waves are normally associated with drought. During the 1930s, it was extremely hot in the United States and it was also extremely dry. This was known as the Dust Bowl. During the 1930s, life became impossible for farmers in the Great Plains and much of the Midwest, and millions of them fled to California. John Steinbeck wrote about this in his book, The Grapes of Wrath. These were real climate refugees from 90 years ago. Now let's go back even further to the pre-industrial period and see what the U.S. government has to say about burn acreage back then. This is the January 2001 update of the Federal Wildland Fire Management Policy. They said, in the conterminous United States during the pre-industrial period from the years 1500 to 1800, an average of 145 million acres burned annually. Today, only 14 million acres, federal and non-federal, are burned annually. They're saying that forest fire burn acreage is down 90% in the U.S. since carbon dioxide was at pre-industrial levels. I made this graph of U.S. forest fire burn acreage based on the data we've looked at so far. In the pre-industrial period, we had nearly 150 million acres burning a year. And now this is what the press is calling the record year. This year's claimed record is down more than 80% since the 1930s and down more than 90% since the pre-industrial period. But facts don't make any difference to the propagandists in the press, and if they read their own newspapers, they would know that what they're saying is simply not true. Here's an article from the New York Times from December 1st, 1992. Studying fire marks in giant sequoias, Thomas W. Swetnam and co-workers have discovered that major conflagrations of fire sweeping across many mountain ranges in California and the Southwest were a common feature occurring at least twice a decade and apparently linked to oceanic currents much further south, these so-called La Nina events that often result in droughts. Finding this synchronicity in fire events was a big surprise to us, he said. It tells me that western landscapes in pre-settlement era were very smoky places. The reason we're having a lot of forest fires right now in the West is the same reason why we've always had them, because we're having a La Nina. This has nothing to do with climate change, it's the exact opposite. It's because the climate is doing the same thing which it always did. The press is lying about this just like they do about everything else, and YouTube doesn't like me talking about this. It's only a matter of time until they shut me down. They could do it as early as this week or next week. And when YouTube does shut me down permanently, it will happen without warning and I won't have any way to communicate with you. That's why I'm moving everything over to newtube.app. Newtube.app is a much better platform than YouTube, BitChute, or any of the other alternatives I've looked at, so I'm moving everything over there. In the description of this video, I've included a link to my new site over on newtube.app. You can subscribe to me over there if you like my content. But please do it now while I can still communicate with you and while you can still find me. And please remember to visit Toto and Kyrie on the web at realclimatescience.com.